A knight on this side, a triad gangster on this side. These two guys, they're the same. Not in weapons, not in fashion, not in accent, but in structure. They both exist inside systems that are part pyramid scheme, part protection racket, and those systems work for their purpose. I recently watched Isaac Arthur's Space Feudalism video, and I want to give my thoughts. Now, I won't be rehashing his points. Instead, I'll be talking about what feudalism is at its core and why it actually should be a very common form of government in fantasy worlds. So, let's dive into what feudalism actually is. Feudalism isn't about paganry. It's not about castles or courts or even the divine right of kings. At its heart, it's a workaround, an improvised way of holding power when you don't have the tools to manage a state properly. You can't afford a full bureaucracy. You don't have reliable communications. You can't guarantee justice, defense, or basic services across your whole territory. So instead, you offer pieces of it to powerful people. And you say to those people, you hold this land, you extract value from it, and in return you serve me and you give me a portion of what you extract. And that's why my first explanation of feudalism is always that it is a political pyramid scheme. It's a layered network of obligations and resource skimming. At the bottom sits the people doing the raw work, the peasants. They generate value, historically through farming, perhaps sometime in the future through mining or coding or any other form of labor. The important part is this: the peasants don't own the resource they're using to extract value from. They pass that value up to the lowest rung of the pyramid scheme almost in total. And then each feudal noble in the hierarchy takes a cut and passes the rest up. Okay, sure, I hear you say. But why would the peasants tolerate this? Even with technological advantages on the side of the nobles, surely they can overwhelm the noble with pitchforks if they have to. Certainly. But this is where the protection racket comes in. Everyone in this system is both a collector and an enforcer. You give loyalty up the chain because you want protection down the chain. If your neighbor raids your village, it's your lord who rides out to stop them, or doesn't. If the bandits burn down farms, your knight breaks up those raids, or fails. That's why feudalism most often rises in unstable and dangerous environments. Because feudalism absolutely depends on three things: personal violence, personal loyalty, and delegated responsibility from the top. If your noble isn't protecting you from the ravages of the world, then it is indeed time to rise up with your pitchfork. So nobles must personally lead defenses and enable peasant safety. And if they're doing their job, the peasant forks over most of their income for that protection. Pretty much like a triad or mafia protection racket, except feudalism was and probably will be in the future sometime legal. And if you think I'm pushing the metaphor, go look up Kowloon Walled City. That's a 6.3-acre slum in Hong Kong that was governed by no one. And it attracted people from the edges of the law. So what happened? Triads filled the vacuum, offering protection, resolving disputes, and enforcing rules. They weren't landlords, but in a very real sense, they acted like a de facto feudal lord. It is what it is. Heck, knights and triad members even share the same obsession with getting respect from the peasants. And for the same reason. Their reputation is critical in minimizing fighting. If people are awed into giving respect, they're not thinking of reaching for that pitchfork. But you have to give feudalism this. When it works, it turns chaos into order at a local level, even when the central state is absent or irrelevant. It can provide safety for the people under the knight's umbrella against whatever hostile forces exist in their environment. Again, Kowloon ran. It worked despite the complete absence of official governance. Sometimes, feudalism is just the deal you have to make with a local protector in order to survive. And that brings us to our second topic. What conditions need to be in play for feudalism to arise? Feudalism isn't some kind of natural state. It's a response to certain conditions. It tends to emerge when several conditions are present. Your central authority is weak or distant. Threats are real and local. Administrative capacity is low and the bureaucracy is weak. And cultural cohesion among the elite is high. The last one is often overlooked, but it is essential. Feudal systems don't survive purely on fear. They survive because the people at the top believe they're supposed to be at the top. And more importantly, that they belong there together. They recognize and respect each other as peers, even when they're rivals, even if they're at war. Which is why nobles were taken hostage in the Middle Ages rather than just being killed most of the time. And that peerage is built on a shared culture of honor, chivalry type codes, lineage, religion, or at the very least, mutual advantage. If elite cohesion breaks down, for whatever reason, cracks form hard and fast. Take the War of the Roses in England. This brutal civil war wasn't caused by foreign invasion or peasant revolt. It was nobles turning on each other because the shared sense of hierarchy and legitimacy within the aristocracy collapsed. Rival factions no longer accepted each other's right to rule, and the system spiraled into dynastic warfare. Or look at the investiture controversy in the Holy Roman Empire, a power struggle between emperor and pope over who had the authority to appoint bishops. This dispute tore apart loyalties among nobles and clergy alike because it challenged the ideological glue that held the elite order together. In both cases, feudal structures took a lot of strain and began to fall apart, not because of peasants, but because the elites could no longer agree on who was in charge of what and what the rules were, or whether they were even still on the same team. This is why in most stable feudal systems you see elite marriages, shared rituals, a common language, and usually some form of indoctrination that tells everyone that these are the elites and they're on the same team, even when they're clearly not and are actively fighting each other. Quite often, you also see religious or philosophical legitimizing elements like the European divine right to rule during the Middle Ages, because the noble was selected by God for this position. They were literally born better. And of course, all of this ties back to enforcing respect from the peasants, the guys actually doing the labor. It's why back-chatting a knight will get you whipped or hanged if you're a peasant, because the elites have to remind that peasant that they're in control and they have the right to be in control. Their might makes right. Their might protects you, but only as long as you're respectful. And that brings us to one last point I want to make about feudalism before we head into the fantasy realm. Feudalism demands personal action because systemic rules just don't exist under feudalism. There are no HR departments, no ombudsman, no chain of appeal. Everything order, justice, stability flows from one guy on a horse making a call right there in the field. And that is both its greatest strength and its most dangerous flaw. See, a noble doesn't lead from behind a desk. He leads from the front. His power isn't abstract. It's made real by his body, his voice, and the armor on his back. That's why knights and lords literally rode out to fight, because their authority came not from the title, but from their presence on the field, from people seeing them show up, sword drawn, to defend the village or collect the tax. That's where technological edge mattered. Castles, war horses, chainmail and plate armor, all of it made the noble untouchable, but also enabled them to actually fight for the peasant, to ensure peasant safety. Feudalism is a system that depends entirely on a person. If your local lord is smart, brave, and fair, things might go great. If he's corrupt or lazy or gets an arrow through the neck, everything falls apart. There's no backstop, there's no process. That makes feudal societies inherently fragile. Economically too. You don't get long-term growth or trade booms when your local tax rate depends on whether your baron had a bad week. That's why economies really start to flourish under bureaucratic rule. Bureaucracies may be boring and they may be tiresome to work with, but they're predictable. Predictability makes contracts work. It makes investment possible. Feudalism, by contrast, is a gamble. It works when strong people act well, and it collapses when they don't. So yes, personal leadership is heroic, it's dramatic, it's cinematic, but it's also deeply unstable. And that's why it makes great stories, but terrible economies. When I was researching this video, I came across a guy on YouTube lionizing feudalism, like it was some kind of lost golden age when Europe was in the Middle Ages. And I just kind of sat there, blinking at the screen. Look, I'm not here to villainize feudalism. It worked in certain times and places. It brought stability where there wasn't any. But the reason you and I have access to more comfort, wealth, and innovation than any medieval king could dream of is because we live in predictable systems. Systems where thousands, even millions of people can invest their time, skill, and resources into building things without having to ask a knight for permission or bribe a baron or worry about what the next knight down the road is going to say about what they're doing. During medieval Europe's feudal period, invention and innovation were sporadic at best. But do you know where innovation boomed during that same period? In Song Dynasty China, under a strong, centralized, meritocratic bureaucracy. Gunpowder, the compass, movable type printing, paper money, civil engineering. They had literally all of that. Why? Because their government was stable, coordinated, and merit-driven. Now, to be clear, the Song dynasty didn't last forever. Their bureaucracy didn't collapse. Their army failed. They prioritized internal administration and intentionally weakened the military to prevent warlord uprising. And what happened? They got punked by the Jurchens, who invaded from the north and carved out half the empire. And just when the Songs settled into ruling the south, the Mongols showed up and finished the job. The Song is maybe the greatest historical example of a civilization doing everything right, except remembering that the world is violent. They revolutionized printing, commerce, and governance. But the system didn't fall because of mismanagement. It was simply outmatched by an organized external force to which they had neglected their own defenses. And it's a brutal reminder that good governance means nothing if you can't defend it. And as a European and a Finn, I really hope it's a lesson Brussels is taking to heart in this time. I think it is. We're spending more on our military than we were before. But reading about the Song collapse and researching this video and some others, honestly, it was kind of nerve-wracking in how much it rhymes with our recent past. Great governance. Maybe need some more men with guns. Anyway, my point is, we've got problems in the modern world. Big ones. Systemic ones. And yes, a lot of our governance institutions need reform. But burning the whole thing down and going back to knights and honor isn't going to fix anything. Unless, of course, you plan to be the guy on the horse. And let me tell you something. Most of us in that system are going to be the peasants. And that probably includes you. Okay, enough of that. Before we talk about magic and feudalism, give me just a moment to tell you about Worldbuilding Blueprints. It's a book I wrote about world building that has over 80 exercises and worksheets and guides your world building from zero to hero, helping you create a fantasy world that supports your story, including this worksheet that will help you design a might makes right government. And if that sounds interesting to you, you can check it out below. It's been fully funded and all its stretch goals met on Kickstarter, but is still open for late pledges until about November-ish. Or if you're watching after that period, you can buy it from my website. Alrighty, let's move on to magical feudalism. Add magic to any given world, especially hereditary or rare magic, and it only reinforces the chance of feudalism. Magic becomes another version of land, armor, or lineage, something that justifies unequal power. That's why so many fantasy worlds, even if unintentionally, end up reinforcing feudal logic. If your ability to affect the world, to defend, rule, or even survive depends on you personally being powerful, then the structure that emerges is always going to be that hierarchical pyramid model. Whether it's wizards or bloodlines or dragon riders or chosen ones, if the world doesn't run on systems, it runs on people and their personal power. And that means dominion follows might. And just like in real history, it doesn't really matter why someone is powerful. Whether it's magic or martial skill or control over a giant teleporting war elk, what matters is that power is concentrated, not distributed. And wherever power is concentrated, you get that pyramid. Writers of fantasy don't necessarily copy medieval Europe, though that does happen too, let's be fair, a lot of writers copy medieval Europe. But the physics of the world quite often demands feudalism. If there are no reliable systems, no mass literacy, no fast communication, no bureaucratic state, then the only thing that holds the realm together is the proximity to someone stronger than you, and hence feudalism, because you need the mage to defend you from other mages, if nothing else. I myself leaned into this in Sangwheel Chronicles, my epic fantasy series. My nobles are all mages because in the Empire, my magic system looks like a hereditary one. That's not completely accurate, but that's a story for another day. So, when you're creating your magic system, ask yourself, does power live in systems or in people? Can a noble rise by using institutions? Or would people follow them if they suddenly threw fireballs around? If it's the second, you're in a feudal system with or without castles. Feudalism is extremely good at creating local stability in chaotic environments and at scaling rule across distances where central governance can't reach. And that's why it also works in space feudalism, as Isaac Arthur said in his video. when you're far from central governance and you need a strong warrior to keep everyone safe. Feudalism is just the best go-to structure because it handles violence, power, and loyalty very, very well. And in high-risk settings like magical frontiers or space colonies, that's often what matters most. How well do you handle violence? The thing about feudalism is, it's sticky. Once it sets in, the elite have every reason to keep it going. And they have all of the resources because all of the power is concentrated in their hands. Their children inherit power, their allies reinforce it, and their ideology wraps it in honor, religion, or cosmic order. It becomes very hard to shake feudalism, and normally it requires either the elite cohesion to shatter or peasant labor to become inordinately valuable, as happened in the Black Death period in Europe, or frankly both. And even when feudalism breaks down, its bones remain. That's why we still have titles and loyalties that echo in Europe to this day in the constitutional monarchies. And it's why there was that guy on YouTube talking about the golden age when people ruled by the divine right of blood. It's an idea that's hard to kill. Anyway, back to our two guys from the start. You've got your knight, you've got your gangster. One holds a fief granted by a king. The other runs a block granted by a boss. They collect tribute. They offer protection. They enforce loyalty with violence or the threat of it. They're obsessed with getting respect. These guys are not anomalies. They're structural to dangerous environments where you need the protection of somebody who is good and willing to engage in violence. And that's my thoughts on feudalism and fantasy. If you've made it this far, drop a pitchfork or a clippy in the comment to show peasant solidarity. Or a crown if you're one of those. I don't judge. Too much, anyway. And a huge thank you to all of you for watching, and a very special thanks to my channel members who make videos like this possible and get all kinds of cool perks in return for their help. Thank you very much for your continued support, which allows me to keep making these videos. If you would like to support the channel, right now one free way is simply to watch another video. And if you like this video, you'll probably like my video on the iceberg of fantasy government systems, which you can check out right now on screen. Or you can follow whatever the algorithm is recommending to you. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World Building.